Well, welcome everybody to today's bonus webinar on cracking the e-learning authoring challenge with Ethan Edwards, our Chief Instructional Strategist here at Allen Interactions. My name is Carrie Zenz, and I'll be on here with Ethan for the next 45 minutes. Thanks for all the guesses on that song. It is a theme song well known from the Rocky movies. It's called Gonna Fly Now. I think it's by Bill Conti. So that was fun and very inspiring, I think, for conquering, effective e-learning, engaging e-learning, and bridging the gap from like effective design to applying it in a tool, which is what Ethan is going to be showing us today. So before we get started quick, I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that at Allen Interactions, this is our mission to enhance the human mind and spirit through the 3 M's. And if you've been on our other webinars this series, you've seen me do this multiple times. So I'm going to move on. We have multiple services. Our roots are in effective instructional design with all of the work from Dr. Allen. I believe he might be on the chat today. I also have Claire Lesney and Rich Peterson on the back channel to help. Please make sure you switch your panel from all panelists to all panelists and attendees so that we can see everything that you're saying. Any questions that you ask, please ask any questions. I'm going to be interrupting Ethan as he's building the interaction today. So I'm going to try to be timely and get your answers to your questions as you ask them. So we want a live and active chat. This will be recorded. We'll be sending that out. And I think with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ethan so he can get going.
Well, thank you, Carrie. As always, such a pleasure to work with the team here and to share what we are all about with all of you who have decided to join us. And so today, we're building on what we have been working on the last few weeks. And, we've been really trying to be inspiring you to think of better ways to do interactivity through CCAF. And the reason I wanted to do Gonna Fly now is that it all depends on this moment when we're going to make it all happen. Because your ideas don't make that much difference unless you can implement them. And I find that, ever since its inception, I haven't been in an inception, but I've been doing this for about 35 years. And the problem always is, oh, I get it, but I don't know how to build it. And I'm not a programmer, and I don't have HTML or whatever. Every year it's a different thing that I don't have. And so it's very easy to say, well, the problem is the tool. And I'm not denying there aren't challenges with tools, but the bigger problem is ourselves, that we don't attempt to do what we ought to do. And so the session today is going to just illustrate that probably, and again, maybe I'm off on my assessment of people's understanding, but from what I talk with people, to show that, there's a lot more possible to you that isn't that hard, and to demonstrate that through a little example. So let's go on. Why can't I proceed? I'm going to stop sharing and try again because there's something wrong with the sharing. Okay, let's hope it works now. So it's not letting me go forward in my display.
It's not. Huh.
Well, I'm going to scrap the me in the picture because I think maybe that's, I try to just share regularly. Sorry, I'm so sorry about this. We tried it just a little bit ago, but I know this is a beta.
Yeah, maybe there's just some buggy thing
feature,
happening
maybe
right now.
something happened. So always be prepared for things to go wrong. Okay, so here we are cracking the code. And so during our time together today, I want to just share what I think are sort of the biggest challenges to effective authoring, just which motivates this approach. A real quick review of CCAF. I think you're all well acquainted with it, but I just want to review it one more time, and then work through building a CCAF interaction in Storyline 360. One of the examples we looked at earlier, and show that it can be done pretty straightforwardly. So what are our challenges? Why is this even an issue? Well, the biggest thing is most authoring tools make building bad e-learning really easy. Even advanced tools are set up to make page turners sort of the default, that you're sequencing things linearly and you're not really working at the level of interactivity, but rather at the level of questions. There's a template that's for a question, and that question isn't context driven, it's response driven. So you do a multiple choice question with lettered buttons. You do a drag and drop where you're putting things and matching, which are all fine, but they're not really the basis for building a good CCAF interaction, because they don't involve a challenge, they don't create context, and oftentimes the actions are limited by the way the designer of that tool thought this is how you do buttons. And so that it's a big problem. And so when we learn how to use those, oftentimes the examples we learn are sort of examples of e-learning that no one should really want to be building. Another challenge, and this seems sort of stupidly obvious, but it's a really big challenge in doing good e-learning, is it's hard to try things you haven't thought of. You have to have the thought before you can attempt it. And it's hard to think of things that you haven't seen anything like, especially when you're feeling like, well, I'm not a technical person. I don't know what I could do. And so we're not prompted to push things. And so we do fall into this, the patterns that are established by sort of the limitations of the authoring tool. And then finally, the best interactions, in my experience, often rely on trying something that no one has tried before. And I don't mean that you're doing something difficult. It's just that you're breaking down sort of the pre-built expectations that come inherent in the way an authoring tool is created. And you don't do things that are really powerful because it doesn't occur to you. And so the combination of these things, when we're learning an authoring tool, tend to keep us doing the same thing over and over, rather than pushing those boundaries in ways to do things that are truly magical and creative and effective. And so the trick is just getting the confidence to realize, nothing's going to go bad if I try something out of the box. So again, our whole point is that interactivity has to be better than most of it is. Learner has to be engaged in experiences, and a good interaction has these components. There's a meaningful context that draws the learner in. There's a challenge that creates urgency and buy-in for the learner to really try something. The activities, the gestures are really well integrated, so you feel like you're doing a real activity. And then the feedback isn't merely words, but it's consequences and elements that really reinforce how you can do better and what the whole point of the challenge is. Now, we're going to look at an example I showed a few weeks ago, just as a reminder. But in general, when you are pursuing a CCAF interaction, the characteristics of it that you have to try to build in your authoring tool is that it's usually nonlinear, that people can maybe go through things in alternative paths. And again, sort of the default is often that you just create a linear sequence. Often, like in PowerPoint, you have a slide sequence, and it's sort of a pain to deviate from that. Another thing that's really critical is delayed feedback, that you work and you make choices, you do activities, and sometimes the learning occurs in the gap between when you try something and when you actually get judged for that. And so delaying feedback is a really important element of creating simulations and so forth. And again, most pre-built templates are under the assumption I'm asking a question and we give you the answer right away. And so that's a little out of the ordinary too. Oftentimes you have multiple gestures at once, that you might have some objects that you can click on, you have some objects you're going to move, you maybe have a button that you're going to ask for help. And oftentimes templates are not set up to be that kind of a hybrid. And so you sort of find yourself stuck in one rut. And then also there's non-standard elements that become part of the activity, that you're moving items in the scene, not necessarily interactive elements like a button or a radio hotspot or a checkbox, that you're actually manipulating things that wouldn't on the surface appear to be what someone would say, oh, that's the question. And so you have to have a little bit more flexibility of what you're interacting with. And that is usually through direct manipulation of things. Really good interactions have you do something that's operating on a real environment rather than clicking a button that corresponds to something, or manipulating words that are an abstraction of what the real situation is. And then finally, you often want to have intrinsic feedback. And so instead of the simplistic idea of, okay, when you give this, I'm going to say these words as feedback, instead, I'm going to have a whole thing happen that will be the consequences, that will have all the clues to tell you, are you on the right direction or not, but will help you learn it rather than passively answer it. And so those are all some of the elements that are so important that we need to know how to author. And again, it isn't that tools like Storyline and Captivate can't do those things. It's that the way they've been created to be easy to use, what's easy to do are things that aren't these elements. Okay, so on to our task. What I want to do is, you may remember this little interaction that came out of some work we did for a maintenance company. And one of the things is they need to teach their technicians how to use this device that is used to find leaks in a air conditioning system. And the way it works is you move this probe around, and when you find a spot, and it's going to light up with the signals that there's a leak. Oh, there we go. So right in here, you can see that the probe turns from being dark to being lit up, and it sort of goes up in the intensity of how the leak is found. And then if you find it, you can click, and it gets a little warning thing. Okay, so that's the basic functionality. It looks magical. This was built in HTML because the whole piece was, and there's certain advantages. But as I said, when we were talking about this, I said, I can build that in Storyline. And so I'm here to show you how that can be done. And I've made a couple simplifications, and I had to change graphics so we're not using anything proprietary. And as you'll find out, I had to adjust a little bit. And that's one of the primary takeaways that you'll see a little bit later is you can't be wed to things having to work a particular way, but you can make adjustments and still get the very good value of an interaction. So first off, I just want to explain the pieces that I have here. I've got it preloaded so we didn't have to take all that time because we have a short time, but I've got the pieces that are required for this interaction here. There's a background, which basically has this image of an air conditioner. It's got some instructions and so forth. Also, I wanted to make sure that there was nothing that was hard to come by. All the graphics here are either done directly through the icons and different elements in built-in Storyline, or like this picture was taken from, was a picture from Shutterstock. So there was no work done except that I clipped it to fit in the right size. And this little wand was also a picture that was a product. So we have the background, and then we have a wand, and this is the device that's going to light up. In this case, there's this array of lights that will turn green in different quantities based on how strong the leak is. The one thing to know about that is I have that built with states. And so I'm viewing this sort of as a hot, cold, warm, hot game. And so when you're sort of close, you can see that the light's going to have 2 lights. When I get closer to the leak, it'll have 4 lights. And when I'm right on top of the leak, I'm going to have all 7 lights lit up. So that's what we have. And its normal state is turned off, and that's where it's setting. And then we have these 3 targets, cold, warm, and hot. And those are these 3 circles that are of increasing size. And so this little circle is going to be the level of specificity. That's going to sit right where we need to drop the probe. This one will surround it, so it'll give us a zone of, okay, you're sort of close. And then this one will be a broader zone that says, well, you're in the area, but you're not very close at all. And you'll see how that works in a moment. But those are just shapes drawn in Storyline. We have a probe icon. That's this little guy down here. This is what I'm actually going to drag around. I can't drag the whole, this was the problem I came across, is you can't drag the whole piece, because in HTML you can say, okay, this corner is the point I'm trying to match. Whereas without doing some really fancy stuff in Storyline, it's anywhere the object overlaps. And so I needed to have a smaller probe that I would be looking around the system in. Okay, so that's our probe. And then finally, I do have this little success icon that when I find the leak, that'll pop up and say, hey, this is where their leak is. Okay, so those are all our pieces. And we're gonna just systematically go through and create that functionality. Now, the first thing is I want to put these target areas in the right spot. So this is right here where this little junction is on our air conditioner. That's where I'm going to declare that's where the leak is. Okay, so we just need to place that target in the right spot. And then I'll put these other zones centered around it just so that we have these areas that we're going to be checking how close you are to that leak. Okay. Be sure to interrupt me if you have any questions, Carrie. I know, because I think in this presentation, it's best to ask the questions as quickly as close to the time they occur as possible.
Yeah, there was there was a comment, and then there was one question about if this would work well on mobile.
Oh, Yeah, you could certainly do this so that it would be a practice thing on a tablet or even a phone. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so there we have our targets, and now we're going to set up the hotspot. And this is one of the tricks that I think is surprising is we use the freeform objects, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that if you've used Storyline, and that allows you to create a particular interaction. And it has as its base 6 types, and they're sort of the types of interactions. And generally, you get into trouble if you have to stick too close to these. Again, because they're set up to work in a particular way that isn't necessarily compatible with your idea of your context or your challenge. But if you do want it, we want to drag and drop here. And so it's a good way to set that up. We're actually only going to use a little bit of the functionality, but we're going to set up just the relationship between our probe and our hotspot. And so, you know, to do a drag and drop, you just say, okay, the drag item is the probe, and the target that I'm wanting to look for is the hot, this littlest circle. There's a whole bunch of other stuff here that we can worry about with feedback, but we're not going to use it. And so part of your insight is to just say no to some of the things that is trying to help you with. And so that's all we need to do. That's set up the ability to so that it'll recognize, it'll allow me to move the probe, and it'll recognize the relationship between that and the hot as the target. So the very first thing we want to do is just build that up. So if I drag the target, if I drag the probe to the target and drop it, it's going to pop up this this warning, which is confirmation that you found the leak. So a couple things we need to do there is, one is I want to move the warning thing so it sits right where we found the leak. So we'll put that there. We also don't want to see that warning thing at first until you've made the match. So I need to go to the states of that and say its initial state is hidden. Now it's shown masked a little bit here, but that's showing that it's going to start out when I preview this as hidden. And now I need to put a trigger. And this is, you know, there's two things that you need to master in Storyline that are going to open those doors to you and just be really powerful with, is using states and being intelligent about using triggers. So because I created that form of view, it created that trigger to submit. Well, we're not going to ever submit this actually, so I want to go and turn that off so we don't have to worry about that trigger. That's a default thing that I can't seem to prevent happening. And so I'm going to challenge you for a moment to think, what would you do to create a trigger to make this pop up when I move the probe over the circle, and then I want to show that. I'll just give you a second to think what you would do before I show it. Okay, and now hopefully this is not too big of a mystery, because it's pieces that you know, and all triggers act the same way. But I'm going to add a trigger here. And what I want to do is change the state of my warning button to normal. That I'm going to change it from hidden to normal. So change the state of success. That's our red triangle. And I'm going to change it to normal. It would be hidden when we started. And we want to do this when the user drops an object onto another one. And so I want to do this when I drop the probe onto hot. So I'm going to pick the probe. And the target that it needs to be dropped on is hot. Notice you could have it set to drop on several objects if you have a more complicated situation. But there we go. That's all we have to do. That creates a trigger that when the user drops a probe on hot, you're going to change the state of success to normal. The other thing we also might want to do is this probe is going to be stuck there and interfering. So I might want to move it back. And there's sort of complicated, there's ways you can do it through the drag and drop options, but they get doing goofy things that you're hard to to control. So oftentimes, some of these basic features, it's easier just to take into your own hands. So I'm going to create a little animation path that is going to move my probe back to its home. So if we go to animations and we can say add, I'm going to pick probe. It helps if you have the object already selected. So I'm picking probe and I'm going to say add a motion path. And I'll create a little arc so it'll swoop down a little bit as we move. And notice when we do that, it creates this arc. The green dot is where the object starts. So I'm going to move that sort of up here in the vicinity of where I'll have dropped it. And then the red dot is where the path is going to end. So I'll move that over here to coincide with its starting point. I can adjust its curve a little bit. I'm going to drag this out so it swoops down a little bit more so the curve is more rounded. And you could make all sorts of curlicues if you wanted to. And then I'm going to say, you do this in 1 second. So I'm going to reduce that. And it's always good to give things names. So I'm going to call this animation return probe. Okay, so you notice that we got some, we have our probe scene, and you can get to it when you click on an object that's attached to it, that there's a, but otherwise it's hidden. And we got a new trigger, and this happens automatically when you create an animation, and usually this isn't what you want. But let's take it and edit it, because by default, this says move the probe along that path when the timeline starts. Well, we don't want to have it start then. We want it to happen when the user drops the probe on hot. So we'll just do the same trigger. When the object is dropped on, and when its probe is dropped on hot, then I want to play that thing. So far, so good. We ought to have like half of our work done for us. So let's do a preview. We're actually going to do a save.
Hey, Ethan.
Yeah.
There was a question about 508, section 508 compliance, and if this interaction would be compliant with that. Philip said he rarely uses graphic interactions for 508. He's not sure how a screen reader would interact with it.
Yeah, well, the biggest problem is the dragging, because you could label, you could have call out text and so forth. If I were to be doing this for 508 compliance in particular, instead of dragging, I would do an interaction where you click the object you want to move, and then you click where you want it to go. And so you could use the arrow, the keys and so forth to move things around.
Okay.
And so that's, so if there are other ways to, to describe it. If it's, yeah, it's a very hard challenge. And it's, if you decide that you are going to not use any visual cues or any motion cues for all your learners because of the ADA requirements, you're going to end up with very unengaging. You're not using the reason why e-learning is even there, which is, computers
Ethan,
are.
Okay, you're there. Okay. Sorry, you froze up on me for just a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Anyway,
that's okay.
it's a huge problem. I don't think the solution should always be don't do anything that requires any vision or mobility. I think there are ways that you can work around that if you're only having one approach. If you're doing alternative paths, then that's another thing. Okay, so anyway, let's preview this. This is the most frustrating part of Storyline, is waiting for previews to get set. Oh, here we go. So here we have our probe. And notice, ultimately, we're going to make those targets invisible, but they're really good to know while we're working. So what I want to test is if I put the probe in the wrong spot, nothing happens. So I can keep moving things around. And when I get to the hotspot, boom, I get my warning and the probe goes back. So you see it did the 2 triggers by dropping that on. So it's very straightforward and probably nothing that is that surprising. But now we want to add the little spice of having the lights turn on as I'm dragging that probe around. So what I want to do is be sensitive, not just when I drop it, but where I'm dragging that the probe. And it turns out there's a couple triggers that are going to make this just so straightforward. And that is, you can tell if something is overlapping or not, if 2 objects intersect. So I'm going to add a trigger. And this is going to be the first step, is as I get my probe closer to the object, when it gets on the cold zone, I want to turn on the first 2 lights of my my wand. So I'm going to change the state of wand. That's the blue handled thing with the lights. Right now it's normal. I want to change it to cold. That's the state when there's 2 lights on. And when do I want to do it? Not when the user drops it, but when the object intersects. So when the probe is going to intersect with the target, it's going to switch the state of that wand. And so the intersection is going to be with cold. So as soon as I get the probe over the biggest circle, it's going to light up. And then we can look ahead and realize, okay, if I move it over and then I move it back out, I've got to have a way to turn it back to turned off. So if you were looking, or you'll see it in a moment, we'll add a second trigger that's just the opposite. We're going to change the state of wand. This time we're going to turn it back to normal because we'll have moved the probe away from the leak. And so not when the object intersects, but when the intersection ends, when 2 things were intersecting and they are no longer, then and when probe is no longer intersecting with cold, I know that it's time to turn it back to turned off. Okay, and that's the basic nut here that we needed to. Let's see if that works. Hopefully our preview works faster. So here comes the probe. Bam! The lights came on, and they're on as long as I'm in this. And even though I'm overlapping other things as well, I'm still overlapping cold because it's at the bottom. It's behind the 2 little circles. And then as soon as I go off, there the lights go off. So the intersection ended. And so it's very responsive. As soon as I get it off, it goes off and so forth. So our mystery is solved. And so we just need to duplicate that same logic with the other 2 zones. So I'm going to add another trigger. This one will be change the state of wand. This time we're going to change it to warm when the object intersects with warm. And you can copy and paste these, but I know it gets under the pressure of doing it in front of you. I know I would end up maybe changing the wrong thing. So I'm doing these each from scratch, just because I can't talk and pay attention to the details that way. So we need to turn this off. So again, we're going to change the state of wand to cold, because now we're coming back out. So when I'm no longer intersecting warm, then I'm cold. So when probe no longer intersects with warm, it's going to turn back to cold. And then finally, we do that with hot. I'm going to change the state of wand. You got to be content doing repetitive things, which my brain is really good at doing repetitive things. So, so I'm turning it to hot when the object intersects with hot. That's right. Yeah. When probe intersects with hot, we're turning the wand to hot. And then we just have one more to go, and that's when the wand, we're going to change wand to warm when the intersection ends. So when I'm no longer intersecting the probe with hot. I hope that all makes sense. It's a pattern of, as I move in, I'm going to change the light, and then as I move out, I'm going to change them back, ultimately ending up with no lights. So let's try that. So here's my probe. We're cold. We're hot. There we're warm. We're cold. I think I have one of them not quite right, but you get the idea, because it's not going to warm quite when it should. There we go. And so then when I am really hot, when the wand's telling me we're matching and I drop it, all the other interactivity still works. So that's it. It was about 10, 12 minutes to do this. I need to do a little bit of housekeeping. One thing is I want to hide those zones. So that's a big trigger and so all we need to do is, you can't erase them or hide them because they need to be present. But if I need to hide the success thing for a moment because it's in the way of clicking on them. So I'm going to just hide that. I'll bring it back. But on my hot circle.
Jason said opacity is your friend.
That's right. So I'm going to go here to format shape and say, I want that to be 100% transparent. Mm-hmm. It's still there, but you're just not going to see it. But Storyline knows it there. And if I do that with all three of these circles, and this is just under the format options for any object that you have.
There's a few other questions, but I don't know if you want me to ask them right now while you're doing
that.
You
can start asking. I'm just about.
Jason says, do you really need the out for warm and hot since each one has the in trigger?
Yeah, if you don't have the out, they don't trigger. I played around with it. I was hoping that it wouldn't need that.
And then Philip just asked, is there any benefit using shape objects for your target area versus using hotspots?
Well, you can have. Well, this was my brainstorm this morning. It used to be, these intersection things are sort of newer. They used to have to do hovering over, and it would not re-trigger. And so I had to use donuts, and so you could have special shapes that were hard to build in the hotspots. Now that they can just be circles, I could have used hotspots.
Okay.
But as you do things more complicated,
hotspots don't have states.
What?
Chris said he believes hotspots. He or she believes hotspots don't have states.
That's what I was just going to say.
Okay.
Having states is so convenient that even if you're not sure you need them yet, I tend to build them as objects so that I do have the luxury of using states later on, because you can't check logically whether a hotspot has been matched, whereas you can check if the state of a object. So if it's been matched already, you can use that in your triggers. And you can see that I do have a problem here, that one of the triggers here is not right, but I'm not going to fix it now because I want to make sure we have time for questions. So let me preview this one more time now. And now it, so now I just have to sort of hunt around. One thing that is, oh, and there, okay, there I'm, as I move in, I can see that it's closer on this beam, and there it is, and I let it go. Oh, dummy, I had hidden the warning icon because of editing, and I didn't turn it back on. Okay. You'll notice as I'm waiting for this to preview, one other feature that I had to drop from the model was that constrained your movement to actually follow the pipes. And I couldn't find out a convenient way to do that in Storyline, but I actually, in doing it, I think it's better that you aren't, because you've got to figure out where the pipes are and what you want to probe, which is more realistic. And there we go. When I let it go, there we got our warning, our probe goes back. I was actually thinking that if you wanted to have some information to help people know, you could have a hint that if I dropped it the wrong spot, I could have like a shadow path that would highlight some of the pipes that would direct my eye to where I might want to be dropping this. But at any rate, there we go. That's really all I wanted to show. I don't know that it was impressive or not based on what you think, but I know a lot of people look at that first example and say, well, we can't do anything like that. And this certainly didn't, I mean, it took 10 minutes. So you can't really say, oh, it takes too long to build one of these, especially if you have some experience, and it didn't require special graphics, anything like that. So other questions about the building, or I have a few concluding things that I was going to do.
Yeah, Keith had said, couldn't you also move the target areas to back behind the other picture rather than making them transparent?
I don't, you know, we have to try it. I think having the background above them would make them not, you wouldn't match them if they were objects.
Okay.
If you were, I don't know.
Play around with that.
It'd be really, I can play around with that. It'd be hard to monitor because you have to keep syncing them up and down. So I think logically, I like to do things that make logical sense as well as program sense. And I just think it's sort of more natural to think about them floating there invisible than they're at the back. But that's just a personal preference.
And there was just another comment about from Lisa. You can also, she just said you can do a no fill instead of transparent. At least that's how they've done it for something similar.
Yeah.
So just another way to treat the.
Right.
But some really good feedback. Just people saying they like this example.
Once you do them actually, what I found is once you do them no fill, it's very hard to drag them around because you also have to have the border turned off, and they're just harder to deal with.
Yeah.
Because you can't grab a piece of it.
Okay.
Okay. And we can keep going. I just want to, as we have some time here, I just want to give some concluding ideas as we are thinking about this. And so first off, you know, that there we did build, I think, a really fine example of a context challenge activity feedback interaction. You know, notice it's not using words hardly at all. It's just instructions, but it doesn't come into play. That's a really, you know, it just keeps you in the environment. It is giving intrinsic feedback. And there, if we wanted to give other feedback, we could have then triggered it based on dropping, or we could have actually then started using some of the built-in feedback mechanisms in Storyline, we would want to customize what the feedback is. But if you might want to say, if I drop it on the background, you could have a little thing, you keep moving and looking for changes in your wand lights, or whatever you might want to give if you think somebody's not getting it. But then you would use you could either do that with your own triggers and level layers, or you could create custom correct and incorrect layers to take the place of the default ones. But I think a question I was anticipating is, well, why did we use Articulate 360? Was there something special about that? And yes and no. The main reason is I know Articulate 360, and so I'm able to do this. I'm actually not that deep of a user of it, but I know what I've learned is that you can do amazing things with sort of baseline functionality as long as you're willing to take some risks and to try. But it could have been in Captivate, it could have been in other tools. Lectora, I don't hear about Lectora quite as much as I used to, but I know that it had capabilities like this as well. But what I wanted to say is, if you're thinking, well, what tool should I use? In my experience, if you're looking for a tool that would be capable of doing CCAF type of interactivity, these are some of the characteristics it needs. I think you need to have variables, not for what we just did, but for the bigger picture. Because what variables do is they let you keep track of things. They give your piece of memory. If you're doing something, say in PowerPoint, which does not have variables by default, when you move from one slide to a next, or even when you're in the middle, say, of a sequence, you can't really know where you are or what's been done. And variables are simple ways to say, okay, this is where we are. For instance, in the thing I just built, if we were to build that all out, there would be 2 leaks you're supposed to find. And you could find them in either order, but a variable would let you say, okay, I found leak number 1. And then another variable would be, I found leak number 2, or you could have a variable counting how many leaks that and once it gets to 2, you know that you've gotten there, or you can turn some things off once you've established it. And that's what variables allow you to do. And it's very hard to make something responsive and seeming intelligent without variables. Another thing you need to have is alternative branching, and that alternative is to linear. Linear is everything goes in the same order in a straight line all the time. And again, in PowerPoint, it's built to be linear. There are ways to get around that, but it's sort of a pain. And it doesn't feel natural, at least. And so you want that to be actually built in thoughtfully so that you can choose different directions to go in. You want to have complete visual freedom. That is, you want to be able to make it look like you want it to look. You want conditional logic. That is, you need to say, if something, do this. If something else, do that. You want an action response structure. And that's like the triggers, or even the freeform objects are set up to articulate that the learner did something and now you're ready to do something in return. So what's my advice? First, assume you can do it. I think an awful lot of people have the opposite assumption as, well, I can't do it. And you'll never do it if you don't try. And there's much more that these tools allow you to do if you try to think at it creatively. Then also adjust, don't give up. When I found out that I couldn't do the whole wand, I could have said, well, I guess I got to cancel the webinar. But no, I said, okay, well, I didn't think ahead that far, but let me think of a way that I could still make this, to keep the value of the interactivity. So sometimes those limits are going to make you come up with a better solution than you thought originally. Another thing is, leave your computer. My best ideas of thinking of odd ways to approach something are done not while I'm moving things around. There's a picture of one of my favorite authors, Dickens, and it's not of him writing, it's of him imagining characters, and then he could implement those. And so, like, I thought of this improvement on this thing today when I was waking up, and it had nothing to do with trying it until I had that idea. So I really encourage you to try to step away from the blinders that we find when we're punching keys. And then finally, keep calm and save often. You're going to make mistakes, And one of the things is you don't know until it's too late that it isn't going to work, because sometimes things won't work. And my experience, it's sort of hard to reset, to say, okay, I'm going to undo what I did. And it's much easier to say, well, let me go back to the copy that I knew was working. And so I save a new version between almost every attempt of an experiment. Okay, so again, our wrap up here. If you want to know about, yeah.
Interrupting you quick. We have a quick poll. We just wanted to poll and see what tools you guys are using. So we're going to throw that poll up and let you select that and close that out. Sorry to interrupt you, Ethan. Just wanted to make sure people did the poll. We kind of threw this together last minute before you moved on. And if you have to go, because I think we are a couple minutes past.
Sorry,
no, that's okay. Claire will throw resources in the chat to Michael's Guide to E-Learning. That's an invaluable book on effective learning design, an ebook that Ethan's written on CCAF. And then we do have a course coming up that just goes more in depth to building instructional interactions in Storyline.
Yeah, you've heard about our ACIP program, and it has design components stuff. But just like, there is a course in there that's specifically sort of doing what we did today, which is trying to do some unexpected interactions and figuring out how to make Storyline make that work. So if that's something you want, that course is coming up soon, or you could wait and get into the next full cohort of the ACIP.
There's just a lot of really nice comments in the chat. Keith said, Ethan is always worth the time. Bonus Ethan is a good thing. People just feel like this really opened their eyes, to not having to just be stuck in the templates in like Storyline, and to build things, custom and interactive things custom, and not being kind of stuck.
I just want to encourage you to, well, that's why we picked the music, Gonna Fly Now, is if you don't let yourself be imprisoned by expectations and just look at things and say, well, and it's, what do I need the learner to do? How can I make that work? And you can usually make some version of it happen. And of course, to have it really slick, maybe you want to, work with a specialist designer to make something really smooth and slick. But you can do more than you think, even with straightforward tools.
It's like Storyline was the winner here in the tools. But
yeah, that's what I've been noticing in conversation, that seems to be the biggest, the predominant use. So yeah, as we're wrapping up, any other questions I'm happy to answer, but I think that was the gist of the message I was wanting to share with you today.
Becca's asking, do we have any tutorial? Becca, what kind of tutorials are you looking for? Are you looking for just in building and Storyline?
We don't have anything that runs independently. Maybe that'll be down the road, but if you look around, and it's actually too much, but there's an amazing number of helpful YouTube videos that you can just grab onto to teach how to do a little thing. So I would, if you're looking for some help, just search there, keeps your eyes open, but then also think, what can I do with this? Not what can I follow slavishly? How can I make this even better?
There's some good resource tips and resources people are putting in the chat. E-Learning Heroes, David Anderson.
Yeah.
We do have our Design 102 course coming up that Ethan will be teaching April 6th. So that's something to check out too. Claire put that link in the chat, Design 102 with our Allen Academy. And we are sharing the recording, so that will be sent out. Sorry you weren't able to get here earlier, but we'll get the recording out to you. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much, Ethan, for that wonderful
Well,
example.
thank you all. I hope to see you on a future webinar again.
Yeah, we'll be sharing when we're doing something new next. You'll hear about it in your
It's been
email.
nice being with you the last 5 weeks. So
yeah.
see you next time.